Hey, how's it going, guys?
Pretty good.
How you doing?
Doing well, brother.
What's up?
Hey.
Good. How's it going, Warren? And
With my phone.
Hi, is it Phil or Philip?
Phillip, yeah.
Philip, hi.
How's it going?
Just the business itself. That being said, I do
Hello, Gene. How's it going?
the need for
Hello, Gene.
the business is a way to for me to experiment really and to figure out sort of what works and how to build something better that we can create systemic change with. And systemic change can be done multiple ways.
Ready?
Hello, James.
Hi.
So, Karen, do you have any presentation? Do you have like a PowerPoint slides or? Just to let you know, this is recorded. This is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, please, disable the video. Hey, Patrick, amazing. I'm gonna make you co-host, so that if you want to share your screen, you can. By the way, while the debate is going on, you guys can chat. I don't think the chat is disabled. The chat is still, you guys can chat. So Gene, can you take over at this point?
Yeah, I think we could start in about 4 minutes or so.
Awesome, awesome.
Still waiting for Sonny, who's the other negative debate team member. I don't see him here yet.
So Gene, during the debate, I assume we should just stay muted and maybe video off. Is that appropriate?
Yes, the video doesn't make too much of a difference, but you definitely should be muted. Yeah, everyone should be muted.
There's Sonny.
Hi, Sonny.
Hey, how are you?
So we're going to start in about 2 minutes, guys. I'll just give a quick intro and then we can start.
Gotcha. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Just want to make sure.
Hi, Peter.
Paul's here too.
Oh, cool.
Bill Hollings. The light is blinding. Sonny, you too. Your light is blinding too, actually. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, guys. I think we can start. So everyone can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Gene. I'm the organizer of the Seattle Analytic Philosophy Club on Meetup. This is a session that Phil and I put together. Phil is the organizer of Philosophers and Gamblers in the San Jose area. So both of these groups are part of the Virtual Philosophy Network, which is actually an international network of philosophy groups. So we're going to continue operating after the pandemic and do a variety of events like this one. So I really want to thank Phil for kickstarting this process of putting together a team debate. We've done 2 debates before, and I can tell you that it's substantially harder to put together a team debate than a one-on-one debate. So I actually debated in the past 2 debates, and it was like, it's definitely harder to put together a team debate. So a little bit about the logistics. As Phil mentioned, this will be recorded, so you should be aware of that. During the debate, which will last about an hour altogether, I'm going to suggest that everyone who's not a debater mute themselves. In fact, you really do need to mute yourself so to decrease the background noise. So the proposition that's being debated is making decisions based on intuition and emotion is rational. So we have 2 teams of 2 people each. The team that's going to be arguing for the affirmative, affirming the proposition, is Karen and Patrick. The team that's going to be arguing for the negative is George and Sonny. Now, the way the debate is going to go is that the affirmative team will go first. One of the members of the affirmative team will make a 10-minute presentation, approximately. Then a 10-minute presentation will follow from the negative team. Then person 2 from the affirmative team will go, and then person 2 from the negative team will go. And then we'll have about 20 minutes of back and forth, which I'll try to moderate if we need to. Then after that, it's just open discussion, right? Either between the participants, or you can ask questions to the debaters. So with that, do you want to add any comments, Phil, before we kick it off?
No, this is great. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first member of the affirmative team.
Okay, that's me. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen, and thank you for, can everybody hear me? Am I coming
Yes.
through? Okay, good. So I will start my timer. Thanks for joining us today. I and Patrick are going to be arguing for the resolution that making decisions based on intuition and emotion is rational. So the general issue here is that individuals and groups are often criticized for making decisions based on intuition and emotion. Such choices are thought to be too hasty, too uninformed, too biased, and ultimately too irrational. However, Patrick and I are going to try and argue that intuition and emotion have an essential role in decision making. And our arguments are kind of 2 forms. There's the you can't help it's unavoidable argument, right? So we're going to argue that emotions and intuitions have a necessary role in rationality itself, and definitely in decision making, whether that's rational or not. And then the second kind of argument is that rationality that intuitions and emotions can themselves be rational, right? That they are answerable to standards of rationality. And those standards call upon us not to abandon our intuitions and emotions in all cases, but rather to improve them. And there are ways to do that to make them more reliable guides to action. So some opening definitions. We could spend all day trying to define rational. So I'm just using it in a sort of very loose, intuitive sense of processes are rational if they're answerable to reason, where reason is a faculty or process that takes us from premises to conclusions in ways that maximize justification, preserve truth, ideally, right? There's different types of reasoning. So there's deductive reasoning, which is supposed to take you from premises which are supported by, say, direct observation, theoretical investigation, empirical investigation, or some other way of establishing the truth of those premises, to new premises through processes that are directly truth preserving. Deductive reason reveals new truths out of existing truths, but doesn't further knowledge. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, takes you from premises to conclusions based on likelihood, probability, but does expand knowledge. Abductive reasoning takes you from limited observations and reasons to best explanations, predictions, right? So there are various types of reasoning. An important type of reasoning here that we're beginning focusing on is practical reasoning, which is reasoning involved in the making of decisions, in the deciding what action to take, what we should do. So there's a kind of built-in normative, if you will, component to deciding that something is the rational course of action, right? It's what we should do at this point. So when we look at the way that the question is formatted, we're focused on practical reasoning. Now, intuition and emotion, again, we had a lot of time trying to define these. So I'm just going to take a general sense of intuition as a mental state with some sort of cognitive or propositional component, like the intuition, it will rain tomorrow, that it will rain tomorrow, right? That's the content. And the thing that makes an intuition different from other kinds of belief is that intuitions arise automatically, meaning that you're not really, don't have really conscious awareness of what led you to that belief at that moment, that cognitive content at that moment. It's not a result of conscious rational inferences processes or deductive or inductive reasoning, right? So you feel that you want to affirm this content. So it has cognitive content, it arises automatically, meaning without conscious awareness of its origins or support, and it can be motivational, right? So you can have the intuition that you shouldn't have a picnic tomorrow. Emotion is similar in that it can have a cognitive component, right? You can be afraid that the snake will bite you. It can arise without you being aware of where it comes from, right? You just have a fear of snakes. And it can also be motivational, right? You move away from the snake. But with emotion, you also have this affective phenomenological component associated with that propositional content. So intuitions and emotions, in terms of this debate, the thing that makes them problematic is that they seem not to have backup in terms of further argumentation or appeals to evidence, right? So you just have the intuition that you should not go on that picnic tomorrow, for example. Okay, some opening comments on why you might think that it's intuition and emotion are essential to reasoning, practical reasoning in particular. One is you might just think that reason itself depends on intuitions. So there are arguments that the rules of logic are basically things we have intuitive understanding of. So the principle of non-contradiction, that you can't have P and not P, is something you intuitively know is correct. And there are people, if you look into paraconsistent logics, who don't share that intuition. So if reason itself, the laws of logic, for example, depend on intuitions, intuition is inevitable. We all might also think that practical reason in particular needs intuition and emotion for the motivational component of practical reason, right? So practical reason is, I should do this. So you look at the facts and they're, this is what I should do. This is the action I should take. And Hume famously argued that reason is the slave to the passions. Reason can tell you how to achieve various goals, but it can't tell you which goal to achieve. So it might be that reasons and emotions are necessary in our practical reasoning, practical processes to provide key motivational components. And in fact, when people have damage to their emotional system, their limbic system, they become notoriously bad at making decisions. And also intuition might be the best way that we as individuals access the goals, right? So if we're trying to figure out what holiday to go on, it might be that our emotional understanding of what we feel like when we're at the beach is the best way to understand whether or not our goal should be making decisions that get us to the beach for our holiday. And then also, so there's that motivational component. Then the third thing is, in certain circumstances, intuition and emotion might be the best guide to the truth of certain premises, right? So you want your premises, when you're being good reasoner, to be true. What tells you that something is true, that it's a belief you should start from? And I think in certain circumstances, it's okay to say it's just your intuition. One might be in circumstances where you're rushed for time, right? You have to make a quick decision. But it also might be situations where you possess the relevant expertise. So if you are a trained surgeon and you're deciding whether or not to remove a certain part of a tumor in a brain, your intuitions might be the best guide to deciding what to do in that situation. And then there are some things that we think, some beliefs where we think intuition is the best thing we got to decide in the course of a debate whether that thing is true and we should go forward. So for example, in philosophy, we use a lot of thought experiments, like should you switch the trolley? Should you unhook yourself from the violinist? Those are appeals to intuition. And it's not usually said that that means philosophy's just gone crazy. It's just that that's the kind of claim where, given the fact that we don't have an accepted theory of moral value, intuition is the best way to proceed to go forward, right? So again, you might say reason itself is built into rationality because the rules of rationality we accept through intuition, that reason is emotion and intuition are necessary for the motivational parts of rationality. And you might also think that certain premises can take intuition as evidence for their truth. Okay, now, obviously there's some worries here, right? Intuitions, as I'm sure the other side will point out, there's some really predictable biases built into our intuitions. If you rely on expertise and circumstances change, expertise can lead you wrong. There are conflicts, like what if we're trying to make public decisions and people have conflicting intuitions, what do we do? So the result might be that you say, okay, you gotta have some intuitions and emotions, but let's limit them. And the final response to that is to say, I don't think rather than limiting intuitions and emotions in all circumstances, I think the rational thing to do is to improve your intuitions and emotions, right? If they're a necessary part, you improve them. So for example, Hume, who talks about, you know, our intuitive grasp of aesthetic principles or subjective grasp of subjective things like beauty, nonetheless argues you can improve your ability to make good judgments about beauty by exposing yourself to more examples of things, by getting rid of personal prejudices, by sharpening your sensory perceptual abilities to notice details of things, right? So it could be that if there are ways to improve our intuitions, to gain expertise in certain areas, the right thing to do is to do that. So if we think, for example, in moral life, we just have to result, at some point, we have to rest on moral intuitions about whether or not it's right or wrong to do something. There are ways to work on getting rid of prejudices and biases and misunderstandings, misbeliefs in our intuitions that don't involve just abandoning them, but rather improving them. And considering that intuition might provide a central role to decision-making processes, it seems to me that the rational thing to do is to improve your emotions and intuitions rather than try and limit them or abandon them or get them out of your reasoning processes to become more and more like a computer. So it's for these reasons, right? Because it's inevitable that emotions and intuitions will get into our practical reasoning. And because not only that, but reason can help us have better intuitions and emotions in our decision-making, that we argue that it is rational to make decisions based on intuition and emotion. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Karen. So now for the negative team. So, you know, Sonny and George, you guys should decide who wants to go first.
Yeah, George is going first.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sonny. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Thank you, and thank you for that side of the debate, Karen. I appreciate that. Now, my comments are based on my reading of the article, which I was given for this talk, and the title of the article, Don't Mind the Gap, Intuitions, Emotions, and Reasons in the Enhancement Debate, by Alberto Guglielmi, if I'm reading that correctly. Now, so again, my comments are directed specifically at the argument made in this article. Now, And this also touches upon something Karen said. The author inappropriately conflates emotion with intuition. Intuition explicitly is a knowledge claim. So I intuitively recognize something as a door, or I intuitively recognize that as a car, right? I mean, the way that our vast majority of reasoning takes place is in this kind of intuitive processes where we just intuitively recognize objects or things, broadly speaking, or people, right? Whereas an emotion is a reaction that must be rationally broken down, analyzed. And how many times do we feel in a situation that we're being treated unfairly, but yet when we step back and analyze the situation carefully, we realize that maybe it was us that was being unfair. By equating intuition and emotions, the author is seeking to elevate emotional reaction to actual knowledge. In other words, it's equating emotion with intuition, while at the same time evading the need to analyze that emotional reaction because now it is intuition. So again, and Karen, again, I think that made this mistake as well, which again is equating emotion and intuition. Everyone has biases. There's no denying that. The issue is, can we rationally defend our biases? And so again, Karen took some passes at the idea of defining rationality. Now, my read of the article, and I think the most productive read, if you will, is that the author appears to be obscuring religious biases by disguising them as intuitive knowledge beyond rational discussion. And so that's the danger, in my view, where the position is taken, well, the knowledge that I have is just an intuitive knowledge and I don't have to account for it. Now, what is the rational defense of bias? Again, because again, we all have bias, and these biases do appear as, initially at least, as intuitions. What is the rational defense of bias, or what is the rational defense of intuition? A bias is rational if it serves the cause of justice. And so here, because the author in this article is making a political policy claim, right, I think it's appropriate and reasonable and indeed required to ask, does the intuition serve justice? And that's the basis upon which we should analyze all our intuitions and then the subsequent biases that may flow or may not flow from those intuitions. It appears to me that the author thinks that he cannot win the argument at hand based on open, transparent justice claims. And so he invokes obscurant reasons to justify his biases. So yes, I'm saying in the end, if someone is trying to win a debate or a discussion or disagreement by appealing simply to intuition, right, particularly if it relates to public policy or politics, right, that in and of itself is an effort to obscure the real motives of the person making that argument, that oath and intuition, hence I don't have to defend it. The author uses the phrase wisdom precisely because he wants to avoid a discussion of justice. Wisdom is a means to an end, whereas justice is an end to himself. In other words, wisdom is about, again, are you wise in the way that you're going about a goal? It doesn't necessarily question the goal. Whereas justice is about the goal. Is the goal just? And sometimes we, of course, also question if the means is just. But ultimately, justice is always about the end in the final instance. It is appropriate to ask, so again, I'm reading this article as a religious argument, okay, because I think that's the most productive way to read it. It is appropriate to ask if religious conservatives have autonomous justice claims when it comes to social issues. Alternatively, is it their position that it is God that determines what is justice, and we humans cannot question God's justice pronouncements. These divine judgments are manifest as emotions/intuitions. Hence, God's justice is not evident through rationality, reason, but through emotions/intuitions. The secular position is that to base social policy on emotions is to shape such policies on arbitrary, baseless dogma. Indeed, the goal of society is to serve the goal of justice through the deployment of rationally contemplated policies, where biases, emotions, intuitions are openly discussed. This explicitly rejects the notion of religiously inspired justice morality, which by definition is not subject to rational treatment. Put differently, religious biases, intuitions invariably fall on the defense that these biases, intuitions are delivered by God, as in John Smith and his Colon tablets, which actually he never showed anybody. Such arguments are publicly out of favor, as humanity and society have become elevated. Thus, again, the author simply wants to hold that all emotions, biases are equal without having to rationally defend his or her biases. Reason, so, and just some miscellaneous points, the author engages in what I view as reason in the service of dogma, where he claims reflection and reasons can and should be used to justify such insights. Insights speaking through our emotions or intuition. So in other words, we have an emotion intuition, and we're not going to subject those emotions and intuitions to rational discussion, asking the critical question, do these emotions and intuitions serve a justice end? Instead, we're going to turn things on their head. We're going to fashion our reasons around our emotions and our intuition. Here's a case where the reason-emotion dynamic is backwards. Accept the idea that intuitions and emotions can express reasons and sometimes good ones. So intuition as reason, right? Again, that's a formulation that on the face, again, I think we should reject, right? Intuitions shouldn't be ignored, right? But they need to be analyzed. They need to be understood. And here's the case of equating reason and emotion. The intuitions or emotions through which they express themselves are a source of wisdom, or to use an equivalent word of rationality. So without defining rationality. So the intuitions or the emotions are indeed, the claim is it's a manifestation of wisdom, right? So I'm not exactly, in my analysis, I'm not exactly rejecting intuition and emotion. Indeed, like I said, we all have our biases, and our biases express themselves through intuition and emotion. Again, what I am arguing, though, is that it is reason that has to have the last word. And again, reason as an expression of justice, reason as an expression of justice. Ideally, of course, our intuitions and our emotions will serve justice. Again, I have more faith in intuition than I do in emotions, right? But ideally, but again, we should never just trust our intuition. We should always fall back on reason. And again, the highest value in this instance, or maybe in every instance, is justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. So I'm going to turn it back to the affirmative team. So that'll be Patrick.
Thank you, George. So I'm not going to respond to the applied argument of the paper, but I'll respond with what I have. When you conjure up the idea of emotional, intuition-driven decision-making, the default position or assumption is that it's kind of the antithesis of rationality itself, perhaps even irrational. And people would even go so far as to saying that if you want to give emotion decision-making the title, a label of rational, then you're almost making rationality a self-contradicting term. And you can see this in philosophy and debates about using emotion as an informal fallacy, and making appeals to emotion and appeals to passion is a poorly reasoned argument. But the argument I want to make is, if it is the case that our sensory data from our body, that our body collects, is all has like an embedded track of affect baked into it. And so everything we have in our body, all the data we collect, is baked with affect. Then that means all of our argumentation is predicated on a posteriori data that has affect-laden qualities already in it. This means the difference between an emotional appeal and a well-reasoned argument is a matter of degree, not kind. So to champion a good argument is champion emotional nuance, not emotional avoidance. We're not automatons quite yet. So if we take this argument even deeper, irrespective of what points you argue for or against, and irrespective of how reasonable or rational you argue or people judge you as, your adherence to a specific ideological content contains the same affect-driven motivations as the premises themselves. So if you're Hegelian, there's affect built into the desire for Hegelian-centric worldview to be justified and valid through this positive affect, just as much as there is a positive affect for the premises of dialectical logic or his theory of history. There is no outside your emotional experience, ever. Now, this means that you can listen to this argument, and for whatever reason, you could disagree with this argument, but your disagreement is the product of an affect-driven rationality to begin with. maybe disagreeing with this point of view, this sort of monoistic view. Maybe it's has been positively validated through academics, through your studies, through literature and sciences, solidifying memories of positive affect associated around upholding this dualism. But this even goes, and this just keeps going deeper and deeper, right? So the deeper this ideology goes within a person, the deeper one's adherence is to their ideology, the more they're going to defend their position, defend their experiences of positive affect connected to this data points in their head. And the more likely you are to hear contradicting points of view and associate negative affect to that, and then use that sort of experience to reject arguments. So now I want to kind of touch back to some of the points you made, George. And there's a few things. Like I think, intuition can be analyzed and understood. Reason has to be the last word, right? Saying the article is kind of turning things on their head and things like that. So what I want to go back to is, this problem is not a new problem, right? So back in Husserl, when he wrote his, The Crisis of European Sciences, and Derrida responded to this and made a very strong argument about this exact problem. To say that, emotion-driven decisions or propositions cannot be rational is to say that rationalism does not exist. Because if emotions are not rational, and if all our data has affect connected to it, that means we don't ever make rational statements at all. But, the claim is equally absurd to cast the net through all Western philosophy and calling everything an emotional appeal shrouded in compulsions towards some sort of appearance of rationalism. So to argue as Derrida did in this sort of argument of trying to save the honor of reason, of your comment of saying we need to make reason the last stand, right, is that rationality will always try to call itself rational, as will reason. Reason will try to justify itself for itself. And it's not in trying to elevate reason, it's trying to elevate the understanding of the affect that's baked into our arguments and data points, and try to understand, why do I have this intuition, or why do I feel this way about this one thing, right? So the metaphor that Derrida used in this argument is that rationality is either going to run aground or it will be grounded. So either we do nothing and the water gets too shallow and we get stuck on the shore and it's just chaos. And this was, for Derrida, this is responding to what was going on in that period of time, 1930s and 40s. But we can see that today with climate change and lots of other different things where there's a crisis in sciences. And so Derrida's argument is that we shouldn't let it run aground. We should ground it in something and understand that the only way you can make rationality better and to save honor is to challenge where it comes from and challenge the content, the data that it's grounded in. And if that is data points rested in affect that float at the top through intuition, that's where we start. We start as recognizing this and building from the foundation. All done.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'm going to turn it over to the last formal presentation, and then we'll go to the back and forth. So it's the negative team, and that's Sonny.
Thank you, Gene. So I'm going to keep it simple. Let's just look at what's the motion of this debate. It is, the motion is making decisions based on intuition and emotion is rational. So let me repeat that. Making decisions based on intuition and emotion is rational. So like Karen did, before we jump into it, we really have to understand at least two things. One is what is intuition and emotion, and number two, what is rational. So I'm not going to make up these definitions because it's convenient for me in this debate. I'm going to go with a generally accepted definitions for intuition, emotion, and rational, right? So let's start with the first one, intuition and emotion. I think we established already, George mentioned that intuition and emotion are not the same things, but they're pretty close. And since the goal of this debate is not to figure out the slight variations between intuition and emotion, and they both are being used somewhat interchangeably to make a point, let's look at what do they have in common. Intuition and emotion both have one thing in common, and that is they both lack conscious reasoning. So now let's look at the second thing. What is rational or rational decision? For something to be rational, or for a decision to be rational, it has to be based on conscious reasoning, not just subconscious reasoning. It has to be conscious reasoning. So now that we know this, let's take a second look at the motion of this debate. So basically the motion now is making decisions without rational thinking is rational. In other words, conscious decisions can be made without conscious reasoning. How crazy is that? It's like saying a stone sculpture can be made without stones, or a paper airplane can be made without paper. A black line can be drawn with green ink. The answer, of course, is no, because these things are mutually exclusive. You cannot have a conscious decision without conscious thinking. And I really feel bad for my opponents because they are on the wrong side of this debate. They have already lost the debate before even it started. And the only conclusion I can draw is that they must have chosen to be on this side of this debate because based on intuition and emotion. And kids, pay attention. This is the danger of making decisions based on intuition and emotion. So if they have already lost the debate, what are they arguing about? There are many points they're arguing about, and none of which is part of the debate. So let's see if we can go over some of their arguments. One of the points they're trying to make is that emotional decisions are a type of decision making. Of course it is. Most of our decisions on an everyday basis are emotional and intuitive decisions because it takes a long time to make a conscious or rational decision. Every time you see the traffic light turn red, you just know that you have to stop the car. Unless you are a new driver, you don't sit there try to analyze the situation, because if you had to analyze what to do, you'd be dead by now. So you have to make emotional decisions all the time to save time, right? But that's not the point. The second point they're trying to make is that emotional decisions are better than rational decisions, or emotional decisions are not wrong. Again, that is not the topic of this debate, but they're right. There are times when emotional decisions are better suited than rational decisions. But clearly, emotional decisions are not always better than rational decisions. For example, anytime you see somebody with a phobia or somebody with PTSD, it's happening due to a Pavlovian response to a stimuli, which is, you can say, another name for unconscious decision making. And no one here with their right mind would say that phobias or PTSDs are good decisions. The third point they're trying to make is that emotional decisions can also be explained. You can actually step back and find reasoning in emotional decisions. So they must be rational, because basically they're saying that there is a reason behind emotional or intuitive decisions. They must be rational. But this is a tremendous logical fallacy. For example, if you have PTSD, or if you have some type of phobia, say you are afraid of spiders, there is an explanation for it. Just because you can explain something after the fact, or there is a reason behind it, it doesn't make it a rational decision. Because when you are making the decision, it was not a conscious process. But our opponents are very passionate people, so they didn't stop here. They're also attacking conscious decision making by saying, since conscious decision making doesn't always lead to right answers, there is no difference between conscious decision making and emotional decision making. So this is also another logical fallacy, right? Imagine this for a second, right? Before Copernicus, the Catholic Church had us believe that the earth is at the center of the universe. What was the reasoning? Because the Almighty God created us. So it was an example of intuitive reasoning, and we know that that was wrong. Then Copernicus came up with this model of the universe that placed the sun rather than the earth at the center of the universe. Was he wrong? Of course he was wrong, because the sun is at the center of our solar system, not the universe. There are 200 billion suns in the Milky Way galaxy, and there are 100 billion galaxies in the universe. So yes, Copernicus was wrong, but because of Copernicus and his rational mathematical thinking, scientists that came after him, say Galileo, Newton, Einstein, were able to build on top of what he created. So the church was wrong, and Copernicus was also wrong to some extent. But to say that they both were wrong, so they must be equal, I don't think anybody in the right mind would say that. And the final argument, this is the final argument that they're presenting, is that no decisions can be made solely on reason. And I'm not sure that I even fully believe that, but if that were to be true, it doesn't change a thing. If every decision has some aspect, no matter how minor it might be, of emotional processing involved, and as a result that automatically makes it an emotional decision, well, then there is no other types of decision. And if that were to be true, then there is no debate. I mean, if it would be all decisions are always emotional decisions. But that's not true, right? Patrick said it really boils down to what degree, right? Because take the way we know this is because we do this all the time. When you decide what to eat for dinner tonight, it may have some aspect of conscious processing, but it's mostly an emotional decision. You literally go with your gut instinct. Now imagine you are deciding how to buy a house, which is close to say $1 million. Does that decision have any emotional aspect to it? Of course it does. You have to live in that house. You have to like the house because you're going to live there. But is it an entirely emotional decision? No. Again, boils down to what degree. So how can you compare buying a house and signing a 30-year mortgage to buying a hamburger for dinner? While they both have emotional components to it, one is very different from the other. You don't have to, you don't have to be an expert debater. Would agree that buying a hamburger is a more
Hey, sorry, Sonny, I can't hear you.
What can I do for you?
Hey, Sonny, I can't. Your audio is off. Can people hear Sonny?
I
I
lost
lost
him there.
Yeah. So I think for the past like 1 or 2 minutes, what you said was muted. I'm not sure.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
much better.
yeah, you were at Hamburger and Houses.
Okay, so if you can give me 1 minute, so 1 extra minute. So basically the final argument they presented is no decisions can be made solely on reason. And I'm not sure that's true, but that doesn't change much, because if every decision has some aspect, no matter how minor it might be, of emotional processing, and that automatically makes it an emotional decision, then there is no other types of decision. And if that were to be true, then we don't have a debate. It would be all decisions are always emotional decisions. But that's not true. And the way you know that is because we make these types of decisions all the time, right? When you decide to eat something for dinner, it may have some aspect of conscious processing, but mostly it is an emotional decision. You literally go with your gut instinct. Now imagine you are deciding to buy a house, which is say close to $1 million. Does that decision have an emotional aspect to it? Of course it does. You have to like the house because you are going to live there, right? But is that an entirely emotional decision? No. How can you compare buying a house and signing a 30-year mortgage to buying a hamburger for dinner. While they both have emotional components to it, you all would agree that one is very different from the other. I think everybody here would agree that buying a hamburger is more of an instinctive decision, which has a very limited short-term impact on your life than buying a house, taking a loan, and signing a 30-year mortgage. But to our opponents, the point they're making that they're the same decision because they both have some emotional component to it. Again, it boils down to what degree. So that's my final point. Thank you for letting me participate in this debate, and back to you, Gene.
Thank you, Sonny. So we're going to do a little bit of back and forth. So let me tell you how this is going to be structured. So I'm going to give Sonny went last. So I'm going to give the affirmative team a chance to respond, and you can decide between each other which who wants to talk. Let me suggest that your response should be pretty concise, but just try to keep it, let's say, 5 minutes, so we can maybe go like back and forth a couple of times. So the affirmative team can decide who wants to go.
Do you mind if I go, Patrick, or?
Please.
Okay, just 2 quick responses. One to Sonny seems to have made a small debate, well, actually a rather large mistake in reasoning. So I just want to point that out, right? So the resolution is making decisions based on intuition, and emotion is rational. So it's based on is key there, right? So the idea is that you are, any argument will go from premises to a conclusion. And so if you're doing an instance of practical reasoning, that can be conscious, but if one of your premises is an intuition or an emotion, the fact that the justification for that is not conscious does not make your decision-making process any less conscious. So I think it is kind of arbitrary to insist that you have a definition of rationality that links it to conscious processes, and thereby rules out defining sort of, mathematics as having rationality sort of somehow inherently, even if no one's thinking about it or something like that. But if you're going to insist that rational processes are conscious processes, then the fact that they start somewhere doesn't mean that they're not conscious. So the idea is that you're just ending a regress by saying it starts with an intuition or starts with, say, a direct observation. So you could say, look, if I look out the window and I see something, that's an act of perception. It's beginning then a conscious reasoning process, right? But, maybe I'm not conscious of how my retina's working or something like that. So, so to say that, it's like saying that you can't build a house on a foundation if you haven't built the foundation, because the foundation isn't something that you built. No, you start with premises and you get to a conclusion through a process of reasoning. So we're not saying that making decisions based on intuitions and emotions is an unconscious process. We're saying that intuitions and emotions are characterized often, always in the case of intuition, sometimes in the case of emotions, by this factor that we're not aware of them as the products of immediate inferences or conscious reasoning, right? So that's just a simple mistake, but that's okay. The second thing is to go to George's point about do intuitions stand as sort of things not in need of justification, and I think they rarely, if ever, do, right? You can always ask in a debate if someone says, my intuition is this, what are the, you can ask for more, right? Is it something for which there might be evidence? Is there something for which there might be biases, right? I think that one of the things in the paper that you were referring to, he argues, is that intuitions can sometimes, quite often, be linked to other systems of value that people have thought very consciously and aware and do have reasons for, right? So they might have reasons for these sort of religious worldviews that they're putting forward. So definitely, if intuitions and emotions are put forward as something that doesn't need defense, then that's a problem. If they're in a public space where people have contradictory intuitions, right? That is one of the problems with this, right? And that's why intuitions and emotions, reason calls out for us to improve them, to monitor them, to watch for biases, but it doesn't change the fact that maybe in decision making, they're a necessary part of what's going on. So let's not shy away from that fact.
I have one. Can I comment still? Is there time?
Yeah, go ahead. As long as it's really quick.
Yeah. So
a minute or two.
So I want to address, Sonny, this hamburger house problem here. And so when someone buys a house, it's not necessarily 100% rational decision in the way you're describing, right? Like we have affect tied to status in society. We have affect tied to safety and security, to inclusion in society, the well-being of our family, ourselves. We have appeals to aesthetics. We have adherence to capitalism, and we play the ideology of investing because we have to agree to the system, and we have affect to the system, affect towards the idea of fiat currency, etc. Right? There's all these things that are attached to it. So if you actually look at all the data points, all the data points has affect built into it. And in fact, there's even a system like when you go buy a house and you get that like butterflies in your stomach sort of feeling, right? That's the somatic marker hypothesis. And that is the unconscious mind actually trying to push yourselves towards a decision and try to guide you. And when people have damage to the limbic system, that goes away. They have inability to actually get pushed by their unconscious self into deciding these things, and they just are incapable of deciding both houses and hamburgers.
So can I reflect back to that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to turn over to the to negative team now, and I think both of you guys can comment if you want to.
I would like to go first if possible. Patrick made a point.
George, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sonny. Patrick made a point about the idea of grounding reason. And I raised the question of justice. And even this idea of buying a house or buying a hamburger, right? I mean, the problem in society is precisely that we make too many decisions based on emotion. Now, I'm bracketing intuition off, okay? I'm focusing on emotion because I think that's really what we're talking about. I think we're talking about buying a hamburger or buying a house. We are not, ultimately we're relying on our emotions. And I think that's a problem in society. I think indeed our housing decisions should be informed by justice. Our food decisions should be informed by justice, right? Indeed, capitalism, bring this to a macro discussion, is that indeed capitalism indeed appeals expressly to our emotion. So when we buy a house, it's not informed by justice. How energy effective is it? Just by way of example, is this house justice insofar as am I going to be appropriating too much land and not allow others, make it more difficult for them to buy a house, right? So again, I am grounding my analysis in justice, and indeed my critique of broader society is that indeed our decisions are not made by rationalities informed by justice, but indeed way too many of our decisions are based on quite baseless emotions. And so again, I go back to the idea of rationality as defined by justice, right? And that then when we think of society in that way, when we think of our psychology in that way, right, then we could give emotion its proper place, and then intuition also its proper place.
If I could say, Patrick, in response to you, is that I actually agree with you that when you're buying a house, there are many aspects of that buying process as you're going through it would have emotional component to it. But just because a decision has some degree of emotional component attached to it, the question is, does that make it an emotional decision? Because then every decision is emotional decision. And I think that was the last point I was trying to make, that there is no debate, right? There's, all decisions are emotional decisions because, it was touched by emotion. But we have to look at to what degree, right? To what degree emotion was involved in this, making the decision, to what degree. And I think that's where it gets tricky.
Thank you. Does anyone from the affirmative team or both of you want to comment?
I just think it would be kind of interesting. I mean, I like George's focus on somehow that there's a dichotomy between emotions and intuitions and justice concerns, because that might be one of those things where people think that our cognitive relationship with justice is largely driven by emotions and intuitions, right? Because my cognitive relationship with chemistry is largely driven by textbooks and cookbooks, mostly for me. I don't read a lot of chemistry textbooks. You know, I do read a lot of theory about justice, right? But I'm not sure that I've found a convincing, rational understanding of what justice is and how it is to be valued over other social goods like, you know, harmony, equality, I think those things are really related, right? So yeah, so I'm all for championing justice, but I think that justice is one of those things that calls us to be emotional at some points, right? To be angry at some points, that often when we say that particular action is unjust, we rest on our intuitions more often than if we say something is, say, an acid or a base or weighs more than a ton.
Right, but if I may respond very quickly, again, but that puts us in the realm of the rational, correct? I mean, when you start to make a justice claim, right, you're saying there's a rational reason why this is not just or not fair, and we should be. So again, it moves us out of the realm of the emotion, and so then, yeah, I mean, it prompts us to define justice. But again, here we are again in the realm of the rational, right? And so it's rooting rationality in justice, right? That moves the debate and discussion away from emotion and one based on reason and rationality, I would submit.
Right. But I mean, I think it'll be interesting to debate if that moves us away from emotion and intuition.
I mean, so our intuitions about what is just aren't based on emotional responses, intuitions about the world?
Okay, but you can't say, I think this is unjust just because I feel it's unjust, right? You have to try to defend that in a rational way, right? And a way that's going to appeal to others. It's justice because it serves me, right? The people are not going to accept that as justice, right? So then you're going to be, again, I do have my definitions of justice. I've written about this. Just as a side, I point to Star Trek and the popularity of Star Trek to say that justice is broadly conceived as a modern class of society free of ethic and gender biases. That's the macro conception of justice. Okay, now, again, I'm offering that as justice. And again, I'm pointing to some empirical justification, the popularity of Star Trek. But the point is that moves, you can't just say, no one says something's unjust without then saying, okay, I'm not gonna add any further. You have to rationalize, and in the best sense of the word, you have to rationalize that claim in appealing to others and appealing to their sense of fairness and justice.
Yeah, I totally agree. But the problem is if you have a society of 1 million people and half of them think that action X is just, this is just because all of them have an emotional intuition about action X is just for whatever reason. Maybe it's because a lot of things in society are moving that direction and they all have similar empirical data based upon their own lived experiences. And this is why you have different ideas of justice in different countries and different time eras. Because
well, I disagree. I disagree with that notion that we have different definitions of justice. I'll say that, but this is something else though. But now, see, the point is now we're moving away from the subjective. That's the important point, right? We're moving towards, okay, broadly speaking, people hold this view of justice. Okay, so now we have an objective platform. Now, we can disagree, but again, it gives us a basis so we can appeal rationally to that conception of justice. Now, what you're saying is, which I disagree with, is that justice, macro conceptions of justice are subjective. But that's not really relevant for this discussion. As long as we can say, okay, there's a consensus, this is justice, then we can rationally relate our emotions and intuitions to this notion of justice, which sits outside of us, right? So it's no longer driven by our emotion or our personal subjectivity. Now there's something, quote unquote, objective or real that we can appeal to in terms of rationality.
You think this would be a good time to open it up to,
yeah,
to
I think,
everyone,
yeah,
or because I could respond to that, but I think it might be.
Yeah, so we have about like 5 minutes left. If you guys want to do an exchange, or if you guys you think you want to open it up, we can do that too. I think either is okay. So I'll leave it to the team. Go
ahead, Karen.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, well, I was just thinking. I want to stress that I do believe that intuitions are always open for questioning, right? So imagine you have a case where you kids are kind of coming to understand justice, and there's a 2-year-old and he has an 8-year-old brother, and mom's serving dessert and gives the 8-year-old 2 cookies and the 2-year-old 1 cookie, and and says it's not fair. He gets 2 and I get 1, And the mom says, yeah, but he's so much bigger than you, right? And so it's not, so the kid has an intuition, the mother engages in a dialogue with that intuition and makes another claim about what the just or fair distribution is in that situation, right? But I think that, you know, after a certain amount of intuition, it's just going to fall, a certain amount of discussion, it's still going to fall back on the intuitions of the kids about whether or not justice between them is same amount for each individual or same amount relevant to caloric need or something like that.
Well,
right?
wait a second.
So I do think that that like in the case of justice, that sometimes we are going to find that we come to a point where we've talked about other values that things might enter into, like considerations of, you know, the needs of each child, right? We've talked about, you know, other, you know, so we've not just let intuitions sit, we've talked about them, we've discussed them, but absent a, you know, well rationally worked through utilitarian calculus of justice, right, or Rawlsian paradigm, it might be that that's the kind of debate where ultimately intuitions are still our starting point.
Well, let me say this. I think you're making my argument for me, because, right, you started off by intuitively giving your older boy 2 cookies and your younger one, just intuitively. And your younger one made a justice claim.
Mm-hmm.
And you were able to explain and justify your decision based on the justice claim. Now, you know, I think you're giving me a false, you know, sort of a straw man. You know, say, of course, because 2-year-olds are going to be, by definition, unreasonable. But you have really done what I say. I mean, my point is that you're not arguing on your intuition now. You're not simply telling the 2-year-old, I'm giving you one because I feel like I have to give you one. You're telling him, look, he's bigger, you're smaller, this is fairness. That's my argument.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that there are different intuitions there about what's fair, right? So so there might be, you know, the concept of fairness as you know, you take the amount of goods and you divide it equally by the amount of people, and then there's fairness and more like you give according to need, right? And that those might be 2 equally plausible candidates for fairness. And in given situations, the only way to decide between them as to what's really fair is to throw them onto our intuitions, because we don't have a well worked out theory of fairness that automatically seems to include one as somehow not quite fairness, right? So it might be contextual, it might be, so I'm not saying that the 2-year-old's not being rational. I think that they're being rational, right? But they're starting with an intuition, like the mother was starting with an intuition, giving the 2 kids to the 8-year-old and the 1 kid to the cookie to the 2-year-old, right? And they realize that there's different conceptions of, you know, whereas they might, if the mother responds, oh, didn't I give you 2? And he said, no, there's only 1 there. She'd say, oh, no, here's another one, that's 2. They would agree on what 2 is, right? But they might have a discussion about fairness, where at the end of the day, they're left with their intuitions, right? So, for example, in philosophy,
may I just respond?
Right, we give thought experiments about, you know, what to do with the trolley, right? And we just say, you know, we ask for a claim, like, what do you do with the trolley? And we don't ask for justification about what you do with the trolley, right? We say, okay, well, given that, then we apply your intuition there to other situations and try to look for consistency.
Well, let me say this. I mean, my argument is not predicated on agreement. I mean, that's what it seems like you're suggesting. That's somehow predicated on agreement. All I'm saying is that your intuition to give 1 cookie to one and 2 to the other, right? Because your younger child made a justice claim, you responded rationally. You're not arguing on intuition. You're making that decision based on a rational formula. Now, the fact that your 2-year-old doesn't accept it, that's not relevant to the conversation, right? It's just like the issue with the trolley is exactly that. There's no one clear justice decision, right? Do you kill 5 or do you kill 1, right? So there, it's not really, my submit to you is not really an intuitive response. It's really the question is that, look, there is no real good justice decision here, and so either I'm going to kill 1 person or I'm going to kill 5, and neither one is a good justice is a good justice outcome. I mean, that's what I would say. I mean, that's my view of that thought experiment. The other thing was I wanted to respond to this thought experiment in the article about the idea that people still reject incest based on, you give them the caveat that they're going to practice, safe sex. And like, I think, and people still said no, interestingly. They said no. I didn't find that interesting. I found that quite intuitive, because I said, well, what if I gave you a scenario where you're swimming in the ocean, and will you allow me to unleash 2 great white sharks next to you? And will you allow me to chum the water if I guarantee you that the sharks aren't going to attack you, right? Which is to say that if you allow for incest, I mean, the idea that you're going to guarantee that they're going to use contraception, I mean, that's just a false, no one's going to accept that premise, right? I mean, again, I'm running on a tangent here, but I thought that was a curious, I thought that was a very, there's some self-serving points made in that piece. And that was perhaps the one that really stood out in my mind, the idea about incest, and that people still hew to opposition incest, even if the caveat was they're going to use contraception.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I'm gonna, we're pretty much about ready to start the open discussion portion. So what I'm gonna do for the open discussion portion is ask people to raise their hand. I'll kick it off with a question before that to maybe help frame the discussion and maybe bring up something for thought, right? Because a lot of the discussion has been about the relationship of intuition and emotion to perhaps what you could broadly call moral judgments, or maybe political judgments of like fairness or justice, right? So let's, and this might be more for the affirmative team, right? Something to think about perhaps, right? So like, if we assume, for example, again, this is an assumption, right? That some form of moral realism is correct. And we also assume plausibly that many of our, if not all of our intuitions, right, have some evolutionary basis, right? So you might think, what is it that evolution tracks, right? It tracks survival, right? Now again, if you're a moral realist, you might think that your moral judgment should track the moral truth. Right, so this is just like a standard evolutionary debunking argument, right? So the argument might be that, it's possible that our intuitions, right, which have arisen from evolution, right, they certainly track survival. It's possible they could also track moral truth, but that would have to be a coincidence, right? And if you take all the moral judgments, it'd have to be a massive coincidence. So this is an argument, for example, that, someone like Peter Singer, right, might make against like, standard uses of intuition and moral philosophy, like, for example, like what you were describing, like Rawlsian reflective equilibrium. So that's something that just to think about, right? You might think of that, if you ask about the, if you do think there are moral truths, right, or truths about justice, right, it would be a coincidence, right, if our intuitions just happen to track those when we know they track survival. So anyways, that's something to think about. And so I see a bunch of hands up. So Bill Hollings, go ahead.
All right, thanks. Excuse me. So I'm not sure, I'm curious about introducing justice into the conversation. I was not expecting that to be part of this, which is kind of interesting. And I'm not sure we can argue justice and morality as part of this, because those are inherently emotional and they're inherently personal. On one extreme, one person might argue that all people are equal and the veil of ignorance and things like that, and we need to support all of humanity as a result. The other extreme argument might be the only thing that matters is my family, and nothing else in the world matters. And you can't really say one of those is just and the other is not just, because they're emotional decisions based on culture, based on evolution, based on everything that comes to us. And you can't really argue rationally for either of those positions. They're both equally valid because they are inherently a personal decision. We can argue that once we have a framework for our morality, that and we have a goal, that a rational versus emotional decisions towards that goal are inherently contradictory potentially, and the rational approach is the more appropriate one in that case. For example, if I want to keep my teenage daughter from getting pregnant, I can take an emotional approach and say, I'm not going to talk to her about sex. Or I can take a rational approach and say, I'm going to talk to her about sex, even though it makes me uncomfortable because of religious reasons or, just weirdness or whatever it is that is holding me back from doing it. So a rational person would say, I'm uncomfortable about talking about this, or I'm uncomfortable about this approach, but evidence shows that it is the rationally better approach if I want to, reach my goal that is based on my moral, needs that are ultimately emotionally driven. Anyway, I just thought I'd make that point, and I'd like to hear kind of a discussion, a response in terms of what is the an approach to saying that there are arguments to be made about justice.
You're going in on this. Let me respond to that, Bill, which is my position is not that there's going to be consensus on justice. Going back to your daughter, okay. What if your daughter says to you, Dad, I want to get pregnant? Okay. So then the question becomes justice, right? You say, all right, my notion of justice in this instance, and you're being because now when you make the justice claim, now you're being explicit about what your motives are, right? You're explicit about your intuitions. My view is you should not get pregnant because it doesn't serve justice. And this is why. Now she's going to say, my conception of justice is different than yours, Dad. Understood. But the point is not that there's a consensus on justice. I'm not making that claim. The point is, once you understand that the discussion is rooted in concepts of justice, then people explain their motives, right? We go from the realm of emotion now to rationality, right? And so you may very well say to your daughter, this doesn't serve justice because of XYZ reasons. And if you're on that plane of what justice is, you're more likely to have a meeting of the minds, right? Than just the idea, oh, I don't feel you should get pregnant versus I feel I should get pregnant, right? That doesn't move the conversation at all. But once you say, okay, what's justice? Then you move into the realm of the rational. Then you move away from move away from the realm of the emotional and towards the rational.
But what's the difference between me saying I don't want you to get pregnant because you should wait until you're better established, whatever it is, and she says I just want to have a kid, and what's justice? Maybe we have a different understanding of the definition of justice, and maybe we need to clear that up.
No, it's the goal.
It's not really justice. That's just those are just personal.
No, look, we can ask for justice for decisions. No. We can ask for justice for individuals, or we can ask for justice for society. So you're going to say to her, you're going to couch your goals for her, presumably, in things that are going to be just for her, right? In your view, right? Versus things that she's going to say, these are what's just for me, okay? And so
are you using the term justice to mean like a balance of something, or
no? Listen, I'm for the good, right? For the good. What you're saying is not getting pregnant is good for you, and this is how I'm going to define good for you.
Yeah.
And she's going to be okay. I'm going to define good in a different way, okay? Absolutely. And so again, my argument is not that you're going to have a meeting of the minds, but that these good or justice claims move us away. Like again, imagine how convincing will it be for your daughter if you say to her, I don't feel you should get pregnant. How convincing is that? Not very.
Yeah.
Right? Versus, I don't think it's good for you for XYZ reasons. These are the rational reasons I'm putting forward for you. Right? And so again, my argument here is that when you root discussions in, again, justice, and I'm not saying there's going to be a consensus on this, then it's no longer, I feel you should do this because I feel. It's like, okay, I'm making a justice claim. And I'm making a claim in this instance, what's going to be good for you. Versus I'm making a claim about what's going to be good for society. And this is why XYZ reason. So again, I'm saying that it moves us, part of the argument that the intuitive people or the emotional people have, right? What they're simply saying is, hey, everyone has their biases, everyone has their feelings, and so be it. And I'm like, no, we should work to have a meeting of the minds, and we achieve that meeting of the minds through rationality, and we gauge that rationality by some conception of justice, right?
Okay, but I'm stuck on the term justice because it inherently implies a morality call, to me at least. That,
okay, maybe.
Whereas if we reframe what you're saying, my daughter can say I want to get pregnant. I can say I don't want to get pregnant. We each have arguments, plus and minus. Her goal is to get pregnant. My goal is to stop her getting pregnant. And we each can approach that goal rationally, right?
Well, no. Well, my question is this.
But
my question is this
not
to you.
Part of that.
No. My question is this. The issue at hand is, why do you not want her to get pregnant versus why does she want to get pregnant, right? If your argument is simply going to be to her, I don't feel you should get pregnant, right? Then there's no rationality in the conversation, right? If you say, my view is it doesn't serve your cause, right? Again, I use the word justice philosophically here, but again, it doesn't forward your life. It's not good for you. It's not just for you to get pregnant. And this is the reason why, right? If it's just at the level of emotion, right? I mean, then she can get pregnant, and philosophically, you haven't made a convincing argument because her feelings in this instance are much more valid than yours, right? What she does with her body is her choice. One can reasonably argue, right? So I'm saying once we get into the justice realm, we are inherently appealing to some sense of objectivity and some sense of objective rationality in terms of understanding the situation and arriving at some kind of philosophical conclusion. Even if you don't agree in the end, at least you philosophically each understood and rationally have staked out your positions.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, I agree. And that,
I want to avoid. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of people with their hands.
Yeah, sorry.
I want to avoid like a really long
thank you.
So just a couple of things about logistics, and I apologize for not explaining this, right? Because a lot of I guess my assumption is everyone had used Zoom by this point, but a lot of people may not have. So I apologize. So the way you raise your hand is you click participants, right? And if you look, there's a way to...
That's down at the bottom.
Down the bottom, the right-hand side.
For many ways Zoom's is organized.
Yeah, so we have 4 people with their hand raised. So we're going to go in order. And my suggestion is that, if, to have like just, one question and maybe like one response. And because there are like 4 people who want to go at least.
So when you click participants, it's to the right of your name. You can raise your hand, right?
Right. So I'm going to, the next person on the list is Rashad.
All right, thank you. And excellent job with my name. My comment was that the pro team, to me, is arguing from a point of view of emotion and intuition as a necessary component of a rational decision, not a sufficient one. And I think that the objections from the con side are both to the claim that that intuitions and emotions are sufficient. And I don't think that's the claim being made at all. So it seems like on the part of Sonny, there's an acknowledgement that decision-making inherently has an emotional or intuitive component. So that seems like a concession to the necessity. And on the George side, it seems like George wants to scope out that necessary component and only talk about what happens after it. So the argument or the decision or the point of view may be grounded in some sort of an intuition about the notion of justice, for example, but let's scope that out and only talk about what happens afterwards and a posteriori justifications maybe for it. I think that, of course, rationality is an inherent part of a rational decision-making process, but the claim here is that necessarily as a part of that, at least on the grounding level, there's going to be some emotional and intuitive components.
Does anyone want to respond?
Rashad, what is the question specifically? You're asking to talk about the after effect?
I guess I was just making the point that I feel like the con team has either conceded in the case of Sonny, or has scoped out and therefore is begging the question against the pro team by trying to move the discussion and scope out the very thing that's at issue, which is whether or not a rational decision has as a necessary component an emotional or intuitive basis.
Well, I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, no, I mean, the intuition itself has to be subject to rationality. You know, I'm not saying we have an intuition, then rationalize that intuition. Many times,
Yeah.
I said many times, we may very well feel that we've been mistreated. And then in fact, it doesn't matter when we reflect back upon it in a more, we're calmer, not so emotional. You say, you know what, maybe I was the one doing the wrong. So there's no,
Yes.
I'm not privileging. I mean, really, it's important to stress. I'm not privileging intuition. I'm not privileging emotion. I am privileging rationality. Again, with a broader idea appeal to justice, but go ahead.
But I think that what you're ignoring is the grounding, because let's say that you have an intuition that you're being mistreated, and then you think through it rationally, and then you come to the decision that no, after all, I was not being treated unfairly. What you've actually done is you've used rationality to think through the problem until you reach an alternate intuition, the one that now feels right given the thinking that you've done. So it's all actually the culmination of a rational process is an intuitive truth. That's the basis of it all.
I think it's a false tautology. I think what you're saying in the end is because I feel good about the conclusion that I came to, somehow it's based on an intuition. No, not at all. Again, I stepped back, I looked at the facts, and based on an objective understanding of fairness in that instance, I said, you know what, I was wrong. I don't see intuition playing an obvious role there.
But isn't your desire to think that there's an objective justice come from affect, and what types of justice you agree with and what types of justice you disagree with come from affect, and what justice is in this court, or what people in your life and their decisions, whether that's a just person, not just person, it's all of it. Your ideology, your data, all of information is baked in with affect. There's no outside. Like this whole
I think that's false.
That whole
I think
idea,
that's completely false.
No,
I think that's completely false. I can show you, give us any situation, and we can sit here and objectively, we can have a meeting of the minds as to what fairness or justice is. At the same time, you might say, well, I might, for slightly different reasons, come to a different conclusion about fairness or justice, but we can engage in a very objective discussion about fairness and justice. I think you're wrong when you say that that conversation cannot take place. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you takes place every day. If you're standing in line and you cut someone in line, you're going to say that's unjust, point blank. That's it.
I'm not saying the conversation doesn't exist. What I'm saying is it's impossible for an individual to know how much the affect is actually impacting this decision.
I'm not sure what that issue is, but let me say this. Someone cuts in line. Is that just or unjust? I'm asking you.
It depends. Maybe they're
no. Okay,
Well,
no, let's not. Let's.
George, arguably you're cutting in line again and again against all these hands that are up. So.
I'm saying that there's objective justice. I'm saying there's objective justice.
Okay, so let's go to Angel.
I just have a simple question, and I think for Patrick and for Karen, and I'm not too much into the emotional part, but I just want to get more into the intuition part. Do you have a kind of definition of intuition, a working definition? You gave some examples, but is there something more you can do? Yeah,
the working definition I gave, and I had to run through it pretty quickly, came from the paper that George was talking about. And it identifies the key features of an intuition is it's a mental state or mental representation that has cognitive content, so it can be captured by a proposition. It is not the result, like, so you have this, so you have, like, say, for example, a belief that you should not go to the picnic tomorrow, or that the baseball baseball games this weekend will be canceled, or that you bought the wrong couch, right, or something like that. And so there's a content to it, but that content is not it doesn't occur in your mind as the conclusion of a process of conscious reasoning. So it's not something that you are getting to as the result of a rational process. So
would you say it's immediate apprehension?
It oftentimes it's described as something that is sort of immediately apprehended, right? So you ask the surgeon, how did you know that you had to leave that little bit of tumor in there? And they'll say things like, I just knew. But it might be that they have to stare at it for a while and then the intuition arises. So I don't know about the phenomenology of immediacy, but the idea is that you don't have conscious access to the source or the foundation of that belief in terms of other processes of reason. So intuitions, they don't arise from nowhere, right? So there's this
Right.
idea of the
That's-
adaptive
that's-
unconsciousness that
Right.
Malcolm Gladwell talks about, right? Which is what the surgeon's developing through their experience as being a surgeon all those years, right? So their intuitions about how much of the tumor to remove are not coming from nowhere. They're
Right.
not completely unjustified. It's just that if you ask the surgeon in that moment, what exactly was the reasoning process that you went through to conclude that you shouldn't cut out that little bit of tumor, they may not be able to answer that, right? They might just say, I just knew not to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that, and so that's why intuition can sometimes act as this basis and stop a regress, right? So so you started in an argument with a premise that you assert is true, but you can always ask, well, how do you know that's true? And maybe you have another argument showing it's true, but the argument is going to be based on premises, right? So how do you know those premises are true, right? Now, sometimes we stop a chain like that with just direct observation. We can say, well, certain perceptual things can justify a premise, right? So if I believe it's raining outside, I can say, I looked, right? But a lot of times, or you can say, look, I quote an authority. I read it in a book about mathematics, and it was a reliable book, right? But sometimes in certain situations, it just seems to be that we rest on our, well, it just doesn't sound just to me kind of intuition, right? And that also ends the regress because it's not pointing to another argument that we then have to review. So that's the key features of intuition.
Okay. Yeah. So before we move on to the next person, just a very brief comment, right? So in the surgery situation that you mentioned, right? So surgeons train other surgeons, right? They train residents. So like if you're a resident, right, you may very well ask, the surgeon you're training with, the attending surgeon, why'd you do this, right? And an acceptable answer would not be, it just seems that way, right? So you would have to, they are capable of rationalizing it in detail when asked, right? So it's never the case that they simply cannot explain it, because if you're in the situation of being a resident surgeon, you will ask those questions, right? So that's like the phenomenology.
That's often the case, but not always. And it's a good way of checking our intuitions is that you go through those exercises, right? So that you can become a good teacher. But it's so for example, if people are really good at playing chess, they might sort of say, well, I saw the best move to make, and they can't necessarily go back and tell you exactly why that move is going to win the game, right? If they could express it in those kind of rules, it would be easier to program computers that could win chess against humans. It would have been easier, right? So yeah, so I mean, it's interesting research about the adaptive unconscious. And I think if it's a result of expertise, then we would hope, because we want to teach the next generations, that anything you know through the adaptive unconscious, you could also know through other ways, right? You can know through studying successful surgeries and keeping very careful notes and writing rules about what to do and what not to do.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Yorgos.
Hi. Yeah, so a couple points I just wanted to quickly make. So one of the things that I found a little bit confusing with when the two teams were debating back and forth was that it seemed like, so the proposition, making decisions based on intuition and emotion is rational. So I always take like that kind of a statement to mean that the rational part of it is not necessarily, the same at the same level of context. So it's not necessarily the person that's making the decisions based on intuition and emotion that's actually, that's actually describing what's rational about it. Rather, the rational is the analysis done afterwards. So is there, can you look at the same way that a scientist, a psychologist, or whatever sociologist will look at these things and decide and try to determine based on some factors whether or not there's a rational reason for this. So for example, we have like motivated, reasoning and like these biases, but then we have explanations Some of them seem to be very valid explanations. So one of the ones that I've come across that that really struck me as a kind of very insightful is when you have people doing what seems to be on one level. So this again kind of depends on what level of context you're looking at, whether or not it seems rational or not. So at one level, there might be something like climate change denial that seems irrational. But at another level, when you look at a person within their community and whether or not they go against, you know, the general feelings within their community and all the bonds they have, that it breaks down all their connections in terms of, you know, job prospects, in terms of relationships with people and all sorts of things like that. So they're acting intuitively. They're not reasoning out like, oh, look at all these. I mean, sometimes they might, but there's definitely a heavy emotional component that usually plays the role of how they come up with this decision to take a certain path, where a lot of people say, well, that's just, you know, that's just not logical. It's just based on emotion, but you can justify it when you look at the deeper sociological, you know, aspects of it. So that's why, to me, it's rational when you analyze it afterwards, even though the person themselves are not the person that's actually engaging in the rational decision or process. So that's how I interpreted the premise. And then I just wanted to make a little side point. I totally understood and agreed with what Karen had said about the example with the two kids and the mother. I think that's also an interesting case example, because when we get into artificial intelligence and having artificial agents that are going to be making decisions for us, and there's all these ethic questions that come up, and there aren't any clear rational sometimes ways to go. The only rational might be to do a scientific statistical kind of analysis, just like what I think what Karen was suggesting, is that you basically poll people to see what their intuition tells them about what seems to be the right and wrong answer, and then you use statistics to figure out, okay, well, this seems to be the way that most people feel. Of course, might have cultural issues, and maybe things will be different, I don't know, in different areas, but anyways, that's a complex topic. Thanks.
Does anyone want to respond to that, or we can move on to the next person?
I think just very briefly, I think we were making the stronger claim in our talk that the person doing the deciding can be rational in consulting or relying in intuitions and emotion in certain kinds of decision making, or maybe they inevitably have to do it in all kinds. But that's a very interesting point, that there's another way where you can kind of, as an outsider, say, well, that was the rational thing to do, independent of how they made the decision, right? So person X might have chosen, their new car based on flipping a coin. But actually you look at the car they chose and you say, well, it gets really good gas mileage. It has, really good safety features. It's the perfect size for their family. So that's actually a pretty rational decision that they made, but they didn't make it in a rational way. But I think we were making the stronger claim that, given the role of intuition and emotion in reasoning, and the fact that reasoning can kind of call out for ways to improve your intuitions and your emotions, that it can actually be rational from the point of the person doing it can be a rational process for the person doing it.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Okay, Lydia's next.
Hello, everyone. This has been very enjoyable, I have to say. So my question was actually a little bit towards Sonny. So I have been getting a little bit confused, because I feel that there is a notion that rational means also optimal. And for example, in the argument that was mentioned, that would you actually give 1 million and buy a house based on emotional reasons? I think that through logic, especially with an amount like this, and by thinking, for example, the volatility of the housing market, I'm like, you need to consider the rational aspect, but if you really don't feel comfortable in it, then maybe you should not actually buy a house and give 1 million somewhere just based on rational reasons, because because logic can only get you so far. Like if our economy, for example, was able to be modeled based on reasoning, then you know, we could just like replace ourselves with just like programs and everything would work out. But that's not the case. And the other thing that I just like I just wanted to bring up, I think that at least there is a difference between like individual and collective decisions. So, for example, the house decision, or even the burger decision, these are individual decisions. I mean, maybe making a bad investment into a house is something that might affect somebody's family as well. But I think that like there is a difference between you know, a group of people coming out and making a decision which is totally based on emotion, and that decision being a law, for example, which is going to affect a lot of people. And there is a difference when there is an individual that just like that goes and makes a decision that in the end of the day just suits their lives, and they are allowed to suit their lives.
Yeah. So if I could quickly respond to what Lydia just said. Let's say you made a decision, you know, you used the example of buying a house. Let's say you realize at some point in time you're not comfortable, you know, making that decision, and you can actually you can explain why you are not comfortable. You can kind of take it to the next level and go, well, what are the components? Like, what is that made me uncomfortable? So you can actually use reasoning, logic, rational thinking to explain that. So you don't have to just leave it at that, saying, oh, I'm just uncomfortable, hence I'm going to back out. Especially when you're making a decision that has such a long-term impact, right? You will go into it and try to explain the reasoning behind where is that discomfort coming from. That's one thing I just wanted to, so it's not completely, it doesn't have to be, oh, at some point of time we give up and back off because I'm not comfortable. You can actually explain that. You can actually put it in a model and take a look at it. And the second thing I want to say that I actually, I don't know, I don't think you were trying to make this point, but when a decision is made by a group, there are many stakeholders involved, especially in a business setting. And I'm part of many of these decisions. We actually establish ahead of time the decision criteria, how we are gonna, even before we start making the decision, like which vendor are we gonna go with, which software we are gonna select. We actually list out how we are gonna evaluate them, what's gonna be the basis of evaluating them, right? And that needs to be reviewed first before we do that. So I think when more people are involved, especially in a business scenario, it ends up becoming a very rational decision.
Thanks. So I'm gonna, I guess there's someone on the iPhone, Harium, who had a question. I think maybe for Karen. If so, here's an opportunity for you to ask it right now if you can hear me. Sorry,
yeah,
incorrectly.
Yeah. Do you guys can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really enjoy it. So I have a question for Karen. Karen, in her opening statement, she said that emotion and intuition, they can simply be wrong, not always, but sometimes. So if we accept that emotion and intuition, they can be wrong, then the question is how we can improve them. I think she said that the solution is not to exclude them, but rather to improve them. And my question is how we can improve them. She said that they're automatic, they're unconscious, we are not aware of them. And the question is how we can improve something that we don't have control over them, that they are totally, then we are unaware of them, that they're unconscious. This is the first question. The second question is, if we're gonna improve our intuition and emotions through rationality, what does that tell us? Does not that tell us two things? First, they are different. They're not the same, because we're gonna use rationality to improve intuition / emotions. Second, what does that tell us in terms of hierarchy of accuracy, logical accuracy? Does not. I mean, if you're going to use rationality to improve intuition, does not. I mean, in terms of logical accuracy, does not tell us that rationality is more accurate, rationality is more logical, rationality is more true, then if that's the case, I would say she's kind of arguing against her own self position, as far as I understand. And once again, I enjoy it and thank you.
So for the first part, how do we improve intuitions and emotions? And the answer is that it's not necessarily an easy process, right? So the first thing is that people study the problems that frequently occur in people consulting their intuitions and their emotions. So there are certain biases that occur again and again in our intuitive judgments. So for example, we tend to overestimate when some outcome really has an emotional significance to it, right? So we're really afraid of something, for example, then that will affect our ability to accurately assess the probability of it, right? So the most famous case is people are more afraid during takeoff on an airplane than during the drive to the airport, though, you know, we are much more in danger in the car on the way to the airport than in the plane statistically. But just we have this emotional fear of crashing, I guess, in an airplane. That's somehow worse than our emotional fear of crashing in a car, right? But we're literally the safest place to be is in that airplane. Say, you know, your life is much more in danger on the way to the airport. So one way is to study those biases and try and correct for them. Another thing is to with things like the adaptive unconsciousness. You know, studying how we gain. So one of my thoughts is maybe that intuition is the human mind handling big data, right? So it's a kind of process of unconscious inductive reasoning. And that's why experts, according to Gladwell and people like him, one of the things that makes them experts is they have these highly trained intuitions, right? So they can just walk into an art gallery and spot the fakes. They can just look at a chicken and spot its sex, right? You know, chicken sexers is one of the examples of, experts who have intuitions that they can't rationally explain. So, so you study that process, and then you look for the things that, make them, the pitfalls for that. So like Daniel Kahneman says, look, our intuitions, even as in our expertise, can lead us wrong. So we need to rely on algorithms where we can. We need to give our intuitions a moment, right? So he has this thing about how he improved the selection process for the Israeli army to try and determine where new recruits, whether they went to combat troops or not. They used to just go by the intuitions of the interviewer. That didn't work particularly well. So they came up with these quote unquote semi-objective scales where they rated the candidates onto 5 different types of personality traits. And that worked better. But the best was when they rated them on those 5 quote unquote objective personality traits. And then at the end of it, they told the interviewer to close their eyes, wait a minute, and give an intuitive score about what this person's, suitability for combat would be. And it turned out that combining the data and that intuitive score got the best results, right? So, yeah, so it's weird. David Hume thought it's things like, if you want to improve your emotions, you've got to, your emotional responses are to the world. So see as much of the world as you can. You don't want your emotions to be very self-centered. So learn a lot about other people and their emotion and then their effects, read novels, There's lots of writing on emotional intelligence and how it can be improved. So then whether or not emotion is distinct from reason, emotion and intuition are different from reasoning because emotions and intuitions are these mental states and reasoning is a process, which also happens in the mind. So they're obviously different in that respect, right? So in saying things like rationality has this relationship with reason, it's not to equate them, but to say that rationality as a process might rely on intuitions and emotions. So for example, there are some people who offer consistent logics who don't think the principle of non-contradiction is intuitively true. So a lot of us think that you just can't get rationality off the ground unless you think P and not P is false, right? Yeah, and paraconsistent logic, some of them say not necessarily, right? So if that's the case, then you might say, rationality itself is tied to these logical intuitions. The logical intuition that if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. you know, Lewis Carroll has this famous, the tortoise and Achilles, where, you know, they're just, you know, Achilles trying to get the tortoise to accept modus ponens and he just refuses. You know? He's like, what's the argument for modus ponens? You know? And the whole thing is like, well, if you don't have modus ponens, you don't get arguments, but what's the argument for modus ponens? You know? So yeah, so that's the kind of thing, is that not that they're identical, right? But that they might kind of be related, because argumentation starts with premises. And sometimes those premises, their foundation is intuition and emotion. Now, if you can defend those intuition and emotion through other means, I think that's great, because it makes it more publicly appealable. It makes it more available for debate and challenge. But I'm not sure that we can always do it. And in certain situations where you have to make quick decisions, or when you're relying on expertise, maybe we shouldn't try and do it, you know.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have Warren next.
Yeah, very good debate. Thanks, everybody. Most of what I'm going to say has sort of been said one way or another by recent speakers, but I'll just quickly summarize it. It seems to me that a lot of this revolves around the definition of the word rational. So we can refer to, as others have pointed out, the decision or the outcome. Is it a good decision or a good outcome? That's one way to think of rational. On the other hand, we can talk about rational as being the process used. A perfectly rational process can lead to a, quote, bad decision if the premises are bad or false. So it seems that most applications of the rational process, you know, a very good rational process, involve at least one premise that comes from intuition, and perhaps a decision evaluation metric or goal that's also based on intuition. So if we include the premises and the evaluation metric or goal as part of the rational process, which is what Karen was just speaking to, then intuition is, by that sort of thinking, definitely a part of most applications of a very, you know, purely rational process or reason, if you like, especially in our personal lives, perhaps not by scientists and whatnot in the scientific method. On the other hand, if we exclude the premises and goal from the word rational, or from the process, we can still be in favor of the proposition by arguing that a decision made purely on intuition, again, as I think Karen pointed out, with no rational process involved, can still lead to a good outcome and therefore be regarded as rational in that sense.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, economists define rationality as an argument, a choice is rational if you choose the thing you like best. That's it, right? So on that notion of rational, it's very much having to do with, you know, your emotional and intuitive investment in certain things, right? So yeah, I think the definition of rationality is really key. And I'm, as a philosopher, I'm more drawn to the things that you were talking about in terms of processes, and you know, rationality is trying to preserve truth and relationships of justification.
Just one thing, Warren, and this is more of a question than anything else. I feel like you can make a good decision, but not follow a rational process, right? I mean, you can end up making a good decision, or at least for the time being, it may seem like a good decision, because who knows what good decision is, right? I mean, something may seem like a good decision at some point of time, and then 50 years later, we look back and go, wow, the way we treated these people was totally wrong. So yeah, who knows what good decision is, but if we just stick to the process, you know, like this, I think what Karen was saying, and I think I said as well, the process of conscious reasoning, I think that may be a better way to go.
Thanks. So I'm going to go to Anne next.
Hi, thank you. Great discussion. It's really got me thinking. One thing it occurred to me pondering all the things you all said about intuition is that I think intuition is actually a higher form of rationalization, almost like an epi-rationalization or meta-rationalization. in the sense that the examples that we all give, like the chess master that just says, I intuitively knew what to do. I think that's actually based on years of rational practice, an accumulation of a rationally derived experiential base, which somehow then reaches like a tipping point to where when they're confronted with a situation, they can do this lightning recall of their experiential base and apply it to the situation with which they're confronted. So, and I think that's the same about even if you say, gee, I think it's going to rain on Saturday. Unless it's because your arthritis is working up or something, it's probably based on something you're not even conscious of, where you have this experience of your locality, and when your body feels it's a certain humidity, or you see the clouds in the skies. But those aren't, you're not consciously rationalizing at that point, but your brain is doing some like I said, I could just describe it as like an epi-rationalization. It's based on some prior experiential rationalization. It's not just like out of nowhere, I don't think. And the same would go for the, any master at anything, a doctor, or, your example, as Jean said, if asked, the doctor can provide the rationalization. But when the way our brains somehow work is, if somebody's highly expert and experienced, when they're confronted with a complex situation, they don't have to go over certain rationalization steps. They have what I think can be described as an intuition. I think intuition captures that meta rationalization process. So I would actually suggest perhaps intuition should be located supra ordinary initial rationalizations of new situations. So just my thoughts. Thanks, it's been great.
So I have a question about Israel and Palestine.
Well, can I respond to that? Can I respond to that? Which is simply that the problem with that reasoning, okay, is that then what you're arguing is that intuition need not be interrogated, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, that it's just like anything, right? You see a door, you don't have to think it's a door. You know it's a door. You intuitively respond to it as a door. So yes, you're talking about situations where yes, experts, etc. They don't have to think it through. They've been in that situation enough where they can just automatically act, right? But that's very different than saying now you're trying to elevate intuition to some kind of higher level than reason, right? Because then where does that leave us more broadly, right? And so, I mean, it seems like you're taking a very narrow kind of set of circumstances and trying to elevate them to the point that it would actually be politically dangerous.
Well, I don't know about politically dangerous, and I don't know about, I didn't say that, the intuition should never be interrogated. I think, any decision should be capable of being interrogated. But I'm not saying it's above reason. I'm saying it's a component of reasoning, which is of a dimension that it may be somewhat more complex than the typical steps of rationalizing or making a decision that we normally have. And as so yeah, taking it into the political realm is kind of a jump I'm not sure I'm ready to respond to. Yeah, I'm simply saying I think it's a process, and I think that's something that AI could miss. That sort of critical mass access, experiential mass, whereas AI is always going to be every new situation it encounters is going to be the 1, 2, 3 decision process, input, calculate, output. Whereas the human brain seems to, and for all I know, other animal brains have this kind of meta or epi. I mean, in genetics, there's discussion now about epigenetics, which is something above. It's an aggregate of. It's almost like a, an effulgence of. So yeah, I don't think I said anywhere it shouldn't be interrogated. And I'm not quite sure I see the danger of it any more than any decision process.
Okay, just so everyone's aware, we're near the end right now. We probably have maybe like 5 or 10 minutes left, maybe like 10 minutes left. So I see 2 other hands. I'm gonna go to James and then Bill Hollings. So go ahead, James.
A great debate. I don't know who won, but I think both sides, I gather, agree that you're way beyond the Cartesian dualism of Descartes, right? That rationality is not the only source of truth, but that you're relying on the subconscious for intuition and motions that can give you information or rationality for making decisions, right? And so you're by doing that, you're saying that we can make free choices and rely on our free choices, not just with our reason, but with other aspects of our physical beings, our bodily emotional beings. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Which is great if
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, are we moving? I mean, interesting, Descartes grounds reason on that clear and distinct perception, right? Which some might argue is a type of rational intuition, right? So, his starting point for his rational faith in the deliverances of experience is that he clearly and distinctly perceives that he exists and that he has the idea of a being greater than himself, and that idea could not have come from himself, it must have come from God, and that God, being infinitely perfect and much bigger than him, would not give him senses that deceived him, right? So he gets to a faith in things like direct evidence of the senses through what might be argued is a fundamental intuition built into rationality itself, this idea of clear and distinct perception of a truth. So that's kind of fascinating question about whether or not we're moving beyond Descartes, or in some sense, just signing on, right? Yeah, just signing on for the Cartesian program, right? So, because you might say, look, we don't want to go with intuitions, we want to go with observations of the world, right? But Descartes says, you can't get to faith in observations of the world without first starting with this intuition that, clear and distinct idea cannot be a mistake, cannot be false.
But he did doubt. You doubt the sensations first, though, right?
Yeah. He doubted the sensation. He said, he says the cogito, I think, therefore I am. How does he know that cannot be false? And he says, because I clearly and distinctly perceive that it could not be false, right? And so that notion of clear and distinct perception is not, I have good reason for it, I got good evidence, right? It's a kind of immediacy of a relationship to that piece of that. So someone you might amount an echoing thing in the case of modus ponens or the principle of non-contradiction. How do I know that P and not P can't be true at the same time? I clearly and distinctly perceive they can't be, right? And so some people argue that's actually intuition at work, but it's just the intuitions, which are themselves the structure of rationality, right? So yeah, I think that's fascinating bringing Descartes, because we could argue,
I mean, still self-awareness is one of the components of emotional intelligence. So, I mean, I think he just meant I feel, therefore I am.
Maybe, I don't know.
All right, so last question is Bill Hollings.
Thanks. I just wanted to correct a premise that Anne had that about AI, and I wanted to clarify that AI acts intuitively from experience, just like the doctor does. So the decisions that AI makes are not at all procedural. They are exponentially intuitively made. Anyway, that was a sideline. I just wanted to get the participants, ask the participants to comment on the idea that emotional decisions have value as a short circuit to a rational process that is too complex for us to follow through to the end. You know, and that we get halfway through a rational process and then make a leap of faith, let's say, or an emotional decision to take us through the second half. The world is full of examples of that. Almost every decision that's made about COVID seems to follow that pattern, even by the experts. Any investment decision, any prediction of the future that we make, we can follow our logic, but inherently there is an emotional, intuitive leap that we make to say, I'm going to invest in this stock or whatever. Governments make decisions this way all the time as well. You know, we've gone through this rational process, but it's way too complex to actually get to the final point. So we're going to leap to the end, you know, using some kind of emotional, intuitive decision.
Yeah, I like to respond to that, which is I feel like in some ways that's quite an indictment of emotion and intuition, because what you're really talking about is inherent unpredictability of the future. So it's the incapacity to make rational decisions, so that you then just rely on some sense of, well, this makes me this decision, I feel good about it, because there's just no other criteria that's left, right? So again, the idea that, and I go back to the broad premise, which is we're basing decisions based on intuition and emotion, right? Unmediated, because I think that's the implication of the pro side, right? Again, that almost makes my point, which is that is when you have no other information, you make that last irrational choice because there is no basis for a rational decision.
I think three quick things. There's the Humean worry behind all of it that rationality is never going to make a decision for you because you can't get an ought from an is, and decisions are about oughts, and so so you're always going to need some sort of motivation for deciding, you know, to do A or to do B, you know, to buy the house or to sell everything you own, go sail around the world on a yacht. And so rationality can tell you all sorts of things about both options, but not tell you which one's for you. I mean, that you could argue against that. I also think it's a fascinating idea that emotions help us make quick decisions without rational processes, and that's why they've evolved. One of the things is that they've evolved to help us negotiate the millions of decisions that we have to make all day, every day, and that's why people who have damage to their limbic system just they can't effectively function in life very well, because they're not able to make decisions. So that's an interesting hypothesis about one of the roles of emotion, and I think that's often the case. But I also think that sometimes emotions aren't shortcuts, they're necessary parts of the certain kinds of decisions we make. So if your partner tells you that they married you and they say it was a purely rational decision, there was no emotions involved at all, I don't think you're going to say, oh, that's a great decision, honey. You know, like sometimes it seems like some decisions we want to be made based on some emotions, right? I would hope love would come into it. I mean, maybe I'm just a cockeyed optimist, right? But if they say, you know, if you're you know, if you've had a child and you say, look, well, rationally we needed the tax write-off. We hear that people who have children have a more comfortable old age, you know, whatever. You'd say, okay, like these are all very rational, but was there no, you know, emotional aspect to this decision making of, and so, yeah, so maybe sometimes it's a shortcut, but sometimes it's an essential part of the particular decision being made.
Okay, thanks. I think I saw, we probably have like 3 minutes left. I saw Darren making a lot of comments in the chat. Do you want to say anything, Darren, at the very end?
Hey guys, well, I just have really inchoate thoughts. So what I was thinking is pretty much just typed up there. So maybe I'll just read it, which is that what I thought maybe there's a distinction between what we are constrained to do in making decisions versus how we ideally should make decisions, and maybe we should keep these questions separate. So I wrote here, if there were a way for us to make a complex decision rationally, why wouldn't we choose it? Because I understood the debate question is how should we, what was the title? Like, how should we make decisions rationally or with emotion, intuition? So the question I posed here was, if there were a way for us to make a decision rationally, why wouldn't we choose it? Like, it seems like we should do that. But when we don't, of course, we're constrained to use intuitions, or we're left with intuitions, and that's sort of like the next best option. But if a rational option were available, like someone devises a calculator for it that accounts for all the complexity of a circumstance or a situation, why wouldn't we use that? So it actually seems to me that the should question is answered by, yes, rationality, but much of the discussion, these are just maybes, by the way, that much of the discussion might have been actually just circulating around what we're constrained to do or what we have to do because of our limits at the moment. But like, ideally, like, isn't the reason we develop calculators and we have tools like abacuses that we developed historically, like precisely to help us become more rational? That the should is actually on the rational side, whereas the what we're left with, or what we just sort of have to make do with, is on the intuition side. Granted, but like, ideally those should be shaped towards rationality, and ideally it just should be rational, the decisions we make. But these are just my inchoate thoughts, so just possibilities. But that was great discussion. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Darren. So anyone in response? So that's actually like a tremendous question, right? I mean, so like a lot of the discussion is just like, you know, descriptively, this is the way we make decisions, right? And, you know, that's perhaps a limit of what our rationality can be, right? But I think what Darren is saying is that, you know, if we could do a better, you know, normatively, why shouldn't we use a different process if that's, you know, and again, maybe that's available through a non-human method of reasoning like AI, right?
Right. I mean, I think the answer is often if there was a process, then maybe we should, because, you know, any intuition is a claim about the world, right? This is the most just thing to do. This is the best thing to do. This is whatever. And so if there are other ways of confirming the truth of that, then I would say help yourself to them. But I think that the role, the role of intuition and reasoning, especially when you're talking about the intuitions upon which rationality is founded, like the principle of non-contradiction, it may be you just have to, you can't get those out, and nor should you. And also, I think, like when I was talking about getting married, I'm not sure, I mean, maybe I'm just, like I said, cockeyed, romantic, you know, or crazy for thinking this, but I'm sure that someone could eventually develop an app for picking a spouse that would have a much lower divorce rate than the old-fashioned way. But I'm not sure that all of us would be comfortable saying it's the most rational thing is to get your spouse that way, right? Just, you know, go online, say, pick a spouse for me, and then marry whoever comes up, you know. I mean, maybe it's a really good algorithm for that.
No, I do want to briefly take issue with the way that Karen is setting up the question of love, because, right, you're saying the goal is love, right? You're saying the goal is love. Now, how do you do that, right? And so, you know, it's a kind of circular argument, right? You're saying the goal is love. Now, if the goal is something else, then rationality becomes something else, right? I mean, that's the only thing. And it's just, I just want to raise that objection there. No, I mean, look, ultimately, you know, there are normative decisions. I'm not denying that there are normative decisions that go, there are normative factors that go into every decision, that the calculus can only get us so far, right? The point is, what I'm arguing is that we try to externalize that decision making as much as possible, moving it away from intuition, moving it away from emotions, trying to analyze those emotions, trying to analyze those intuitions, right? And so, you know, that's essentially, you know, again, this is what I'm arguing. I mean, I think there's no machine that could ever make decisions for us. I don't think there's any machine you want to make decisions for you, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the goal is love. I'm saying that that the decision of should I marry you, whoever you are, it's one of those things where we think it's okay for love to be involved in the decision-making process. So you might say, well, that's an emotion. You should try and get it out of the decision-making process. I've got an app for you. And I might say, no, look, I'm a romantic. I want love to be part of, look, love might not be the deciding factor, right? There might be plenty of reasons not to marry a particular person that you love, right? But I'm just saying that there might be some decisions where we think No, emotion has a very appropriate role in this decision. You know, if we're in a very different society and marriage has nothing to do with love, that might be completely different, right? But I'm
No,
just
but
saying
my
that
point
there's
is,
some, I'm not saying
we
that the
heard you.
goal is
I heard
love.
you. Well, no,
I mean,
but
I
I'm
have the
saying,
love now when I'm deciding to marry the person or not. It's not the goal, it's there.
well, I mean, you marry someone because you love them. The goal is love. Marriage is just an external to that process, right? I mean, I don't know what you're looking for in a marriage, I mean, other than love. And then, of course, there's some other issues, but that is central, right? That is a goal. I don't think I'm wrong to say that that's a goal, to attain love and support, etc., and so forth.
I mean, right, Karen. I understand that you want to be loved and whatnot, but
So I apologize.
your
You're
husband
breaking
wants
up.
to leave you for a younger gal. You know, he's working all the time. You get sick.
Your sound is really bad. Can you type the question?
Can you not hear me?
I couldn't understand.
Hello?
I barely could understand it. You're breaking up really badly.
Your image is
Oh,
frozen
my
too.
question was, I hear what you're saying about you want an app to get married. But I'm saying, what if your husband's really busy working and you get sick from loneliness and you have to go to retirement home early because you have a dementia and your husband doesn't want to be alone, so he marries a younger gal, but he still loves you and pays for your retirement home.
Yeah, no, I think that's why I'm not asserting that love is the goal. I'm just trying to come up with an example of a practical decision, meaning a decision involving the question, what should I do? Where it seems weird to insist that the ideal is to get the emotion out of the decision. So I gave an example, the decision, should I marry you, right? Is it part of a goal, because I'm a rational person, I want to make a good decision, that I try and get the love out, right? As not something I'm considering when I'm deciding whether or not to marry you, right? So I don't think that is the case. I think when you're making a decision like that, you want the emotion to be part of the decision-making process. That's all I'm saying, right? That there are some, so I think it would be very odd to say, look, for all these reasons. So for example, you might say, look, you know, we're having debates about justice in America. Should we try and completely get all the anger out? And you might say, well, look, the anger, it's important that we address the anger, that we recognize the anger, that we understand the justifications for the anger, and maybe situations where the anger is not justified. It is not rational to just completely try and get all the anger out of the conversation, right? So it might be that there are some situations when we're making human decisions and we are human beings where it just seems wrong to say the ideal is to get the emotion out. Like, we are not Spock, right? We are not Commander Data, nor necessarily should we be, right? And in fact, when human beings have damage to their emotional system, it makes it very hard for them to make decisions. Any decision, not just these decisions that seem obviously to have emotional significance, like who to marry or what to do when some particular part of your community is being oppressed, right? Does that make sense?
But you still make
so Tiny, so she has something to say in the private message. She messaged me.
Okay.
About
yeah, I found it very hard to hear her question.
I think she's kind of sent it to me in my private message.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe I can.
Yeah, you can read it for us. And guys, basically, it's we're past the 2-hour mark, and this is 2 hours. However, like, as far as I'm concerned, you guys, as long as Phil can keep the Zoom session running, we can go as long as you want.
I have no problem. Yeah, okay. Typically we go. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to stop moderating, so you guys just have open discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Gene.
So this is what Tiny messaged me. The
Are you
app, what
gonna
if
say
your
it?
husband is busy? The app, what if your husband is busy working too much and you get lonely and then get ill? Your husband loves you and send you to a retirement home because you have dementia. He loves you because he pays for the retirement home and he then marries your adopted daughter.
My
I'm not,
adopted
I'm not sure.
Just the Woody Allen scenario.
Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, I think that's there's a lot of emotionally driven decisions in that, and I don't know in that in maybe tracing through that scenario whether the answer is to try and figure out what a Mr. Spock, you know, a Dr. Mr. Spock from Star Trek or a Data would do or a robot would do in that situation, but to think what the emotions in question were and whether or not we think that those emotions are, I don't know, appropriate or loving enough, or, you know, yeah. I think in analyzing, it would be weird to say, let's, you know, because probably what we would hear about that situation in a novel, and that novel would trigger emotions throughout as we read it. And I don't think that that shows that we're not thinking about the situation or trying to analyze it, because we're, you know, I think our emotions are giving us indications of how we're responding to the situations and what we think about the situation. And this is the idea that emotions can contribute to understandings of situations. They can have cognitive content, right? So if you're feeling very sad about a situation, it might be because you recognize in that sadness that there's been a great loss on someone's part, right? Someone has lost something valuable. So there's cognitive content in that emotion that could contribute to a discussion about what to do, how to make things better, right? So that's the sense in which I think emotions, and we haven't really talked specifically about emotions.
It can also
right?
misguide you, right? I mean,
Oh, sure, right.
It can also misguide you. And I was going to say one thing. You were talking about an app, you know, where it takes the emotion out of it. Actually, there are cultures still there where, you know, there is arranged marriages, and it's the wedding or the marriage between two parties is decided by the family based on different, like very, love has no business here. Because these two people who are getting married, they have never met each other. The family is decided based on wealth, based on values, culture, multiple other things, sometimes business alliances and other things. And then they come together and decide to, you know, love. And a lot of times, these relationships have been more successful than, you know, when you come with an expectation of love, that I want this, and I expect such and such, because there is an unknown factor here, because you don't know, you don't know the person, you don't know what to expect, and your expectation is so, because it has not been based on love, you know, you have a very low expectation. As a result, a lot of times these relationships start with a rocky start, but in the long run survive.
I would like to say something that Karen said about the anger that's, you know, motivating these protests. And as a matter of fact, I mean, I would even say that even the Kasim is angry, and I know that's not her intent here, is to disparage them. It's not to say that people aren't angry. That's not my point. My point is that people are responding to quite a rational set of circumstances, right? It's not simply that a person was killed unjustly by the police. It's that there's a perception and the view that there is systematic injustice, that the political system is corrupt, that indeed injustice happens every day, or the system is dystopian, right? So even to cast, you know, that's what critics will say, right? Critics will say, oh, these people are just motivated by blind anger, right? They're not thinking rationally, right? Again, that's a disparagement. Indeed, you know, I think a much more sympathetic view is to say, oh, they have a legitimate set of grievances rationally thought out, and this is what is sustaining them, right? So another way of putting this is you look at Portland, where they've had protests for like 50 or 60 days in a row. I would submit that doesn't flow from anger. If it was just anger, anger dissipates. Anger is unreliable, right? But it is what does motivate people, again, personality. that they are serving these interests. It's not to say we get anger because out of society, I mean, anger is a bad thing. In really every instance, anger is a bad thing. What is a good thing is people's desire for justice, people's willingness to sacrifice for justice.
But maybe that's, I think that's, again, one of these short circuit things where we say, I want to see some justice done. This is a systemic problem. We need to address it. But then the decision to do that through, protesting and, in particular, the violent component of that surely must be an intuitive, emotional decision. Right?
Well, but I think that's one of the issues here is that the protests are peaceful. I mean, ultimately, even the question of why do people have to turn to protest, right? Because the system is unresponsive. It's viewed as corrupt. It's viewed as undemocratic. It's viewed as profoundly unfair, right? So people have to engage in in terms of extra normal politics. But again, even the notion to cast them as violent, that is the disparagement, right? That is to say, that their actions are not based on calculated reasons or an rational understanding of justice, but somehow they're just motivated by hate or misunderstanding. See, that's my point. It's, again, to call it a short circuit is to condemn them, right? The protesters, etc.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to love instead of hate. So Karen, you were commenting on marriage decision being, hopefully based on love, which would be an emotional decision. But inherent in a marriage decision specifically would be a very rational expectation that how you're feeling today or over the last 6 months that you've been in a relationship will then continue for the next 40 years, right? So that part of it is actually inherently rational, right? If you thought, I probably will not like this person 6 months from now, or I won't feel the same way 6 months from now, you wouldn't marry them, right? That part of it is very rational.
I think there's a tendency to slip here from identifying a premise that might be justified in a different way, and saying that that's rational, right? So, I think that other things would go into the decision. Some of them might be like a prediction, and that prediction might be based on a rational process itself. It might be another kind of intuition, right? So if I predict I'll feel the same way 20 years from now, that might just itself be an intuition, or it might be the result of some sort of conscious abductive reasoning, and that I've gone through a conscious process of saying, well, my likes and dislikes are pretty constant. I'm not very changeable. This person's not very changeable, right? So it might itself be a process. Like I think the whole reasoning is a rational process. And I'm just saying that the fact that the love is in that process doesn't discount it as a rational process, but there'll be other premises too. I don't think love alone makes a good marriage, right? So you might be thinking about things about shared life goals, whether or not you can stand to go on vacation with the person, right? Like there might be a whole bunch of stuff going into the decision whether or not to marry the person. But my point is that we don't think that emotions have to be taken out of it for it to count as a rational decision, right? So I think, there might be a lot of things. Some of them will be further intuitions. Some of them will be direct perceptions. Some of them will be the result of inductive reasoning, or deductive reasoning, or abductive reasoning. There could be a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Some of them, some of the emotions might be things that you've thought about for a long time. So they're not kind of really intuitions anymore anyway, right? But yeah, I just wanted wanted the emotion in the mix, right?
Bill, you said something about AI and experientially, AI learns experientially, which I agree. But I also think, and you said it's intuitive, right? But it can be explained. I mean, you can explain how AI made that decision. Whereas in humans with intuitive thinking, a lot of times, like the example that Karen was using with the doctor, that the doctor may not know why he or she left the tumor, a little bit of it still there. Whereas
but that's exactly the way AI makes a decision. So when an AI, for instance, there are AIs that look at X-rays and do diagnosis, right? They're doing it exactly the same way we described the doctor doing it intuitively from 30 years of experience. The AI is basically just human experience jammed into a database and then regurgitating that experience to make decisions. So it really is just well, when I saw something like this, it turned out to be cancerous last time, so I'm going to call it cancerous this time. Or so it's all very inherently intuitive, and you cannot. The AI doesn't know why it's making the decision. The humans that trained the AI don't know why it's making its decision. So it is not actually traceable. It's inherently non-algorithmic, based on really just fancy pattern matching, right? Saying this looks and feels like a stop sign, so I better stop the car if I'm a self-driving car, right? There's no sort of step one.